The centaur Chiron wept hereat, and piteously dismayed did call on thee, although in vain, thou Delphian god for aid. For neither lay it in thy hand to break Jove's mighty hest, and though it had, yet in thy state as then thou did not rest. In Elis did thou then abide, and in Mycenae land. It was time when under shape of shepherd, with a wand of olive and a pipe of reeds, thou kept me as sheep. Now in this time that, save of love, thou took none other keep, and madest thee merry with thy pipe, the glistening Maia's sun, by chance, abroad the fields of Pyle, spied certain cattle run without a herd, the which he stole, and closely did them hide among the woods. This pretty sight no earthly creature spied, save one old churl that Battus hight. This Battus had the charge of wealthy Neleus' feeding grounds, and all his pastures large, and kept a race of goodly mares. Of him he was afraid, and least by him his privy theft should chance to be bewrayed, he took a bribe to stop his mouth, and thus unto him said, My friend, I pray thee, if perchance that any man enquire this cattle, say thou saw them not, and take thou for thy hire this fair young bullock. T'other took the bullock in his hand, and showing him a certain stone that lay upon the land, said, Go thy way. As soon this stone thy doings shall bewray, as I shall do. So Mercury seemed to go his way. Anon he comes back again, and altered both in speech and outward shape, said, Countrymen, ich heartily beseech, and if thou sawest any key come roiling through this ground, or driven away, tell what he was, and where they may be found, and I shall gie thee vor thy pain, and Hector and here match. The carle, perceiving double gain, and greedy for to catch, said, Under yonsome hills they were, and under yonsome hill chamjure they are, and with his hand he pointed there until. At that Mercurius laughing said, False knave, and dost bewray me to myself, dost thou bewray me to myself, I say? And with that word straight to a stone he turned his double heart, in which the slander yet remains without the stone's desert. The bearer of the charmed rod, the subtle Mercury, this done arose with waving wings, and from that place did fly. And as he hovered in the air, he viewed the fields by Loavatic, and the town itself with all the trees that grow in lee sea, where the learned clerks did wholesome precept show. By chance, the very self-same day, the virgins of the town of old an ancient custom bear in baskets o'er their crown, beset with garlands, fresh and gay, and strowed with flowers sweet, to Pallas' tower, such sacrifice as was of custom meet. The winged god, beholding them returning in a troop, continued not directly forth, but gan me down to stoop, and fetch a windlass round about. And as the hungry kite, beholding unto sacrifice a bullock ready dight, doth soar about his wished prey, desirous for to snatch, but that he dareth not, for such as a stand about and watch, so Mercury with nimble wings doth keep a lower gate about Minerva's lofty towers, and round and wheeling rate. As far as doth the morning star in clear and streaming light excel all other stars in heaven, as far as also bright Dame Phoebe dims the morning star, so far did Herse's face stain all the ladies of her troop. She was the very grace and beauty of that solemn pomp, and all that train so fair. Jove's son was ravished with the sight, and hanging in the air began to swelt within himself, in case, as when the polder hath driven the pellet from the gun, the pellet gins to smoulder, and in his flying wax more hot. In smoking breast he shrouds his flames, not brought fro heaven above, but caught beneath the clouds. Helios is journeying towards heaven and takes another race, not minding any longer time to hide his present case. So great a trust and confidence his beauty to him gave, which though it seemed of itself sufficient force to have, yet he was curious for to make himself more fine and brave. He combed his head, and stroked his beard, and pried on every side to see that in his furniture no wrinkle might be spied. And for because his cloak was fringed and guarded broad with gold, he cast it on his shoulder up most seemly to behold. He takes in his hand his charmed rod that bringeth things asleep and wakes them when he list again. And lastly, taketh keep that on his fair well-formed feet his golden shoe sit clean, and that all other things thereto well correspondent being. In Cecrops court, where chambers 3 set far from all resort, with ivory beds all furnished in far most royal sort, of which Aglaros had the left, and Pandrosi had the right, and Herse had the middlemost. She that Aglaros hight first marked the coming of the god, and asking him his name, demanded him for what intent and cause he thither came. Pleianus' nephew Maius' son did make her answer thus: I am my father's messenger, his pleasure to discuss to mortal folk and hellish fiends, as list him to command. My father is the mighty Jove. To that thou dost demand, I will not feign a false excuse. I ask no more, but grant to keep thy sister's counsel close, and for to be the aunt of such the issue as on her my chance shall be to get. Thy sister Herse is the cause that hath me thither that. Fet, I pray thee bear thou with my love that is so firmly set. Aglaros cast on Mercury her scornful eyes aside, with which against Minerva's will her secrets late she spied, demanding him in recompense a mighty mass of gold, and would not let him enter in until the same were told. The warlike goddess cast on her a stern and cruel look, and fetched such a cutting sigh that forcibly it shook both breast and breastplate, wherewithal it came unto her thought, how that Aglaros late ago against her will had wrought in looking on the lemon child, contrary to her oath, the which she took her in the chest, for which she waxed wroth. Again she saw her cankered heart maliciously repine against her sister and the god, and furthermore, in fine, how that the gold which Mercury had given her for his meed would make her both in wealth and pride all others to exceed. She goes me straight to Envy's house, a foul and irksome cave, replete with black and loathly filth, and stinking like a grave. It standeth in a hollow dale, where neither light of sun nor blast of any wind or air may for the deepness come. A dreary, sad, and doleful den, aye, full of slothful cold, as which I dimmed with smouldering smoke, doth never a fire behold. When Pallas, the same manly maid, approached near this plot, she stayed without, for to the house and enter might she not, and with her javelin point did give a push against the door. The door flew open by, and fell me into the floor. There she saw Envy sit within fast, gnawing on the flesh of snakes and toads, the filthy food that keeps her vices fresh. It loathed her to behold the sight. Anon the elf arose and left the gnawed adder's flesh, and slothfully she goes with lumpish leisure like a snail. And when she saw the face of Pallas, and her fair attire adorned with heavenly grace, she gave her a sorry sigh from the bottom of her heart. Her lips were pale, her cheeks were wan, and all her face was swart, her body lean as any rake, she looked each askew. Her teeth were furred with filth and dross, her gums were werryish blue. The working of her festered gall had made her stomach green, and all bevemed was her tongue, no sleep her eyes hath seen. Continual cark and cankered care did keep her waking still of laughter, save at others' harms. The hell hand can no skill. It is against her will that men have any good success, and if they have, she frets and fumes within her mind, no less than if herself had taken harm. In seeking to annoy and work distress to other folk, herself she doth destroy. Thus is she tormentor herself. Though Pallas did her hate, yet spake she briefly these few words to her without her gate. Infect thou with thy venom one of Cecrop's daughters 3. It is Aglaros whom I mean, for so it needs must be. This said, she pied her spear in ground, and took her rise thereon, and winding from that wicked wight, did take her flight anon. The caitiff cast her eye aside, and seeing Pallas gone, began to mumble with herself the divil's paternoster, and fretting at her success, began to blow and bluster. She takes a crooked staff in hand, bereaved with nubbed pricks, and covered with holy cloud. Wherever that she sticks her filthy feet, she tramples down and sears both grass and corn, that all the fresh and fragrant fields seem utterly forlorn. And with her staff she tippeth of the highest poppy heads such poison, also everywhere ungraciously she sheathes, that every cottage where she comes, and every town and city do take infection at her breath. At length, the more's pity, she found the fair Athenian town, that flowed freshly then in feastful peace, and joyful wealth, and learned wits of men. And for because she nothing saw that might provoke to weep, it was a courtesy to her heart her hateful tears to keep. Now, when she came within the court, she went without delay directly to the lodgings where King Cecrop's daughters lay. There did she as Minerva bade. She laid her scurvy fist, besmeared with venom and with filth, upon Aglaro's breast, the which she filled with hooked thorns, and breathing on her face did shed the poison in her bones, which spread itself apace, as black as ever virgin pitch through lungs and lights and all. And to think that cause of grief abundantly should fall, she placed before her eyes her sister's happy chance in being wedded to the god, and made the god to glance continually in heavenly shape before her wounded thought. And all these things she panted out, which in conclusion wrought such corpses in Aglaro's breast, that sighing day and night she gnawed and fretted in herself for very cankered spite. And like a wretch she wastes herself with restless care. What was that? Okay. I lost my place because there was a sound. And like a wretch she wastes herself with restless care and pine, like as the wise whereon the sun with glimmering light doth shine. Her sister Herse's good success doth make her heart to yearn, in case as when that fire is put to green felled wood or fern, which giveth neither light nor heat, but smoulders quite away. Sometimes she minded to her sire her sister to bewray, who well she knew would ill abide so lewd a part to play, and oft she thought with wilful hand to brust her fatal threed, because she would not see the thing that made her heart to bleed. At last she sate her in the door, and leaned to a post, to let the god from entering in, to whom now, having lost much talk and gentle words in vain, she said, Sir, leave I pray, for hence I will not be your sure, unless you go away. I take thee at thy word, quoth he, and therewithal he pushed his rod against the barred door, and wide it open rushed. She made proffer for to rise, did feel so great a weight through all her limbs, that for her life she could not stretch her straight. She strove to set herself upright, but striving booted not. Her hamstrings and her knees were stiff. A chilling cold had got in at her nails, through all her limbs, and each her veins began for want of blood and lively heat to wax both pale and wan. And as the fretting fistula, foregrown and past all cure, runs in the flesh from place to place, and makes the sound and pure as bad or worser than the rest, even so the cold of death strake to her heart, and closed her veins, and lastly stopped her breath. She made no proffer for to speak, and though she had done so, it had been vain. For way was none for language forth to go, her throat congealed into stone, her mouth became hard stone, and like an image sate she still. Her blood was clearly gone, the which the venom of her heart so slowly did infect, that ever after all the stone with freckled spots was specked. When Mercury had punished thus Aglaro's spiteful tongue, and cankered heart immediately from palace town he flung, and flying up with flittering wings did pierce to heaven above, said, Son, my trusty messenger and worker of my will, make no delay, but out of hand fly down in haste, until the land that on the left side looks upon thy mother's light, yon same, where standeth on the coast the town that's side in height. The king there hath a herd of neat that on the mountains feed. Go take and drive them to the sea, with all convenient speed. He had no sooner said the word, but that the herd began driven from the mountain to the shore appointed for to run, whereas the daughter of the king was wanted to resort with other ladies of the court, there for to play and sport. Between the state of majesty and love is set such odds as that they cannot dwell in one. The siren king of gods, whose hand is armed with triple fire, whose only with his frown makes sea and land and heaven to quake, doth lay his sceptre down, with all the grave and stately port belonging thereunto, and putting on the shape of bull, as other cattle do, goes lowing gently up and down among them in the field, the fairest beast to look upon that ever man beheld. For why? His color was as white as any winter's snow, before that ether trampling feet or southern wind it though. His neck was bronzed with rolls of flesh, and from his chest before a dangling dewlap hung me down good half a foot and more. His horns were small, but yet so fine, as that ye would have thought they had been made by cunning hand, or out of wax been wrought. More clear they were 100-fold than is the crystal stone. In all his forehead, fearful frown or wrinkle there was none, no fierce, no grim, no grisly look as other cattle have, but altogether so demure as friendship seemed to crave. Agenor's daughter marveled much so tame a beast to see, but yet to touch him at the first too bold she durst not be. Anon she reaches to his mouth her hand with herbs and flowers. The loving beast was glad thereof, and neither frowns nor lowers. But till the hoped joy might come with glad and fawning cheer, he licks her hands, and scarce the residue he forbear. Sometimes he frisks and skips about, and shows her sport at hand. Anon he lays his snowy side against the golden sand. So fear by little driven away, he offered eft his breast to stroke and coy, and eft his horns with flowers to be dressed. At last Europa, knowing not, for so the maid was called, on whom she ventured for to ride, was ne'er a whit appalled to set herself upon his back. Then by and by the god from main dry land to main moist sea gan leisurely to plod. At first he did but dip his feet within the outmost wave, and back again. Then further in another plunge he gave, and so still further, till at the last he had his wished prey amid the deep, where was no means to scape with life away. The lady, quaking all for fear, with rueful countenance, cast eye towards shore from whence she came, held with her right hand fast one of his horns, and with the left did stay upon his back. The weather flasked and whisked upon her garments, being slack. The third book of Ovid's Metamorphoses. The god, now having laid aside his borrowed shape of bull, had in his likeness showed himself, and with his pretty troll time landing in the Isle of Crete, when in that while her sire, not knowing where she was become, sent after to inquire her brother Cadmus, charging him his sister home to bring, or never for to come again. Wherein he did a thing, for which he might both justly kind and cruel call it be. When Cadmus over all the world has sought, for who is he that can detect the thefts of Jove, and nowhere could her see, than as an outlaw, to avoid his father's wrongful ire, he went to Phoebus' oracle, most humbly, to desire his heavenly counsel, where he would assign him place to dwell. And Hecuba all alone in field, quoth Phoebus, mark her well, which never bare the pinching yoke, nor drew the plough as yet, shall meet thee. Follow after her, and where thou seest her sit, there build a town, and let thereof Boeotia be the name. Down from Parnassus' stately top scarce fully Cadmus came, when roiling softly in the vale before the herd alone, he saw an Hecuba, on whose neck of servage print was none. He followed after leisurely, as her that was his guide, and thanked Phoebus in his heart that did so well provide. Now he had passed Cepheus ford, and each the pleasant grounds about the city Panoply contained within the bounds. The Hecuba stayed, and lifting up her forehead to the sky, full seemly for to look upon, with horns like branches high, did with her lowing fill the air, and casting back her eye upon she rest that came aloof, as softly as she could kneel down, and laid her hair aside against the grassy mold. Then Cadmus gave Apollo thanks, and falling flat by low, did kiss the ground and hail the fields, which yet he did not know. He was about to sacrifice to Jove the heavenly king, and bade his servants go and fetch him water of the spring. An old foregrown unfelled wood stood near at hand thereby, and in the midst a queechy plot with sedge and oysters high, where curbed about with pebblestone in likeness of a bow there was a spring, with silver streams that forth thereof did flow. Here lurked in his lowering den god Mars, his grisly snake, with golden scales and fiery eyes, beswoln with poison blake. 3 spurting tongues, 3 rows of teeth within his head did stick. No sooner had the Tyrian folk set foot within his thick and queechy plot, and deep down their bucket in the well, but that to bustle in his den began this serpent fell, and peering with a marble head right horribly to hiss. The Tyrians let their pitchers slip, for sod and fear of this, and waxing pale as any clay, like folk amazed in flight, stood trembling like an aspen leaf. The speckled serpent straight comes trailing out in waving links and knotty rolls of scales, and bending into bunchy bots his body forth he hails, and lifting up above the waist himself unto the sky, he overlooketh all the wood, as huge and big, well nigh as is the snake that in heaven about the northern pole divides the beers. He makes no stay, but deals his dreadful dole among the Tyrians, whether they did take them to hurt their tools or to their heels, or that their fear did make them stand like fools and help themselves by none of both. He snapped up some alive, and swept in others with his tail, and some he did deprive of life with rankness of his breath, and other some again he stings and poisons unto death, till all the last were slain. Now when the sun was at his height, and shadows waxed short, and Cadmus saw his company make tarriance in that sort, he marvelled what should be their let, and went to seek them out. His harness was a lion's skin that wrapped him about. His weapons were a long, strong spear, with head of iron tried, and each alike in piercing dart. And thereunto beside worth all the weapons in the world, a stout and valiant heart. When Cadmus came within the wood and saw about that part, his men lie slain upon the ground, and each their cruel foe of body huge stand over them, and licking with his blow and blasting tongue their sorry wounds. Well, trusty friends, quoth he, I either of your piteous deaths will straight revenger be, or else will die myself therefore. With that rotting fast, a mighty millstone at the snake with all its might it cast. The stone, with such exceeding force and violence forth was driven, as of a fort the bulwarks strong and walls it would have riven, and yet it did the snake no harm. His scales, as hard and tough as if they had been plates of mail, did fence him well enough, so that the stone rebounded back against his freckled slough. But yet his hardness saved him not against the piercing dart, for hitting right between the scales, that yielded in that part whereas the joints do knit the back, it thurled through the skin, and pierced to his filthy maw and greedy guts within. He fierce with wrath wrings back his head, and looking on the stripe the javelin steel that sticked out between his teeth doth gripe, the which with resting to and fro at length he forth did wind, save that he left the head thereof among his bones behind. When of his courage through the wound more kindled was the ire, his throat bowl swelled with puffed veins, his eyes gan sparkled fire. There stood about his smeared chaps a loathly foaming froth. He scaled breast ploughs upon the ground, the stinking breath that goeth out from his black and hellish mouth infects the herbs full foul. Sometimes he winds himself as knots, as round as any bowl. Sometime he stretches out in length as straight as any beam. Anon again, with violent brunt, he rusheth, like a stream increased by rage of late fallen rain, and with his mighty sway bears down the wood before his breast that standeth in his way. Agenor's son, retiring back, doth with his lion's spoil defend him from his fierce assaults, and makes him to recoil, aye, holding at the weapon's point. The serpent, waxing wood, doth crash the steel between his teeth, and bites it, till the blood drop, mixed with poison from his mouth, did dye the green grass black. But yet the wound was very light, because he writhed back and pulled his head still from the stroke, and made the stripe to die by giving way, until that Cadmus, following irefully the stroke with all his power and might, did through throat him rive, and nailed him to an oak behind the which he eke did clive. The serpent's weight did make the tree to bend, it grieved the tree. His body of the serpent's tail thus scourged for to be. While Cadmus wondered at the hugeness of the vanquished foe, upon the sodden came a voice, from whence he could not know. But sure he heard the voice which said, Agono son, what gazeth thus upon this snake? The time will one day come that thou thyself shalt be a snake. The time he pale and wan for fear had lost his speech, and ruffled up stiff staring stood as here. Behold, man's helper at his need, Dame Pallas, gliding through the vacant air, was straight at hand, and bade him take a plough, and cast the serpent teeth in ground, as of the witch should spring another people out of hand. He did in everything as Pallas bade. He took a plough, an ear to furrow low, and sowed the serpent's teeth whereof the foresaid folk should grow. Anon, a wondrous thing to tell, the clods began to move, and from the furrow first of all the pikes appeared above. Next rose up helms with feathered crests, and then the pauldrons bright, successively the curate's whole and all the armor right. Thus grew up men like corn in a field, in ranks of battle ray with shields and weapons in their hands, to fight the field that day. Even so, when stages are attired against some solemn game, with clothes of arras gorgeously, in drawing up the same, the faces of the images do first of all them show, and then, by piecemeal, all the rest in order seems to grow, until at last they stand out full upon their feet below. Affrighted at this new-found foes, 'gan Cadmus for to take him to his weapons by and by resistance for to make. Stay, stay thyself, cried one of them that late before were bred out of the ground, and meddle not with civil wars. This said one of the brothers of that brood, with lancing sword he slew. Another sent a dart at him, the which him overthrew. The third did straight as much for him, and made him yield the breath, the which he had received but now, by a stroke of forced death. Likewise outraged all the rest, until that one, by mutual stroke of civil war, dispatched every one. This brood of brothers, all behewn and weltered in their blood, lay sprawling on their mother's womb, the ground where erst they stood, save only 5 that did remain, of whom Mechion, led by Pallas' counsel, threw away the helmet from his head, and with his brothers gan to treat atonement for to make, the which at length, by Pallas' help, so good success did take. That faithful friendship was confirmed, and in hand was plight. These afterward did well assist the noble Tyrian knight in building of the famous town that Phoebus had behight. Now Thebes stood in good estate. Now Cadmus, might thou say, that when thy father banished thee, it was a lucky day. To join alliance both with Mars and Venus was thy chance, whose daughter thou hadst ta'en a wife, who did thee much advance, not only through her high renown, but through a noble race of sons and daughters that she bare, whose children in like case it was thy fortune, for to see all men and women grown. But I, the end of everything must marked be and known, for none the name of blessedness deserveth for to have, unless the tenor of this life last blessed to his grave. Among so many prosperous haps that flowed with good success, thine eldest nephew was a cause of care and sore distress, whose head was armed with palmed horns, whose own hounds in the wood did pull their master to the ground and fill them with his blood. But if you sift the matter well, ye shall not find desert, but cruel fortune to have been the cause of this his smart. For who could do with oversight? Great slaughter had been made of sundry sorts of savage beasts one morning, and the shade things were waxed very short. It was the time of day that mid between the east and west the sun did seem to stay. Whenas the Theban, stripling, thus bespake his company, still ranging in the waveless woods some further game to spy, our weapons and our toils are moist and stained with blood of deer. This day hath done enough, as by our quarry may appear. As soon as with her scarlet wheels next morning bringeth light, we will about our work again. But now Hyperion bright is in the midst of heaven, and sears the fields with fiery rays. Take up your toils, and cease your work, and let us go our ways. They did even so, and ceased their work. There was a valley thick with pineapple and cypress trees, that armed be with prick. Gargaphy hight this shady plot. It was a sacred place to chase Diana, and the nymphs that waited on her grace. Within the furthest end thereof there was a pleasant bower, so vaulted with the leafy trees the sun had there no power, not made by hand nor man's device, and yet no man alive a trimmer piece of work than that could for his life contrive. With flint and pommy was it walled, by nature half about, and on the right side of the same full freshly flowed out a lively spring with crystal stream, whereof the upper brim was green with grass and matted herbs that smelled very trim. When Phoebe herself waxed faint, a following of her game, it was her custom for to come and bathe her in the same. That day, she having timely left her hunting in the chase, was entered with her troop of nymphs within this pleasant place. She took her quiver and her bow, the which she had unbent, and each her javelin to a nymph that served that intent. Another nymph to take her clothes, among her train she chose, to loosed her buskins from her legs and pulled off her hose. The Theban lady, Crocally, more cunning than the rest, did truss her tresses handsomely, which hung behind undressed, and yet her own hung waving still. Then Niphy, neat and clean, with hyale glistening like the grass in beauty fresh and sheen, and Ronish clearer of her skin than are the rainy drops, and little bibbling Phaley, and Pasiki, that pretty mops, poured water into vessels large to wash their lady with. Now, while she keeps this wont, behold, by wandering in the frith, he wist not whither, having stayed his pastime till the morrow, comes Cadmus' nephew to this thick, and entering in with sorrow, such was his cursed cruel fate, saw Phoebe where she washed. The damsels at the sight of man, quite out of countenance dashed, because they ever shown were bare and naked to the quick, did beat their hands against their breasts, and cast out such a shriek, that all the wood did ring thereof, and clinging to their dame did all they could to hide both her and each themselves for shame. But Phoebe was of personage so comely and so tall, that by the middle of her neck she overpeered them all. Such color as appears in heaven by Phoebus' broken rays directly shining on the clouds, or such as always the color of the morning clouds before the sun doth show. Such sanguine color in the face of Phoebe gan to glow, there standing naked in his sight. Who though she had her guard of nymphs about her, yet she turned her body from him ward, and casting back an angry look, like as she would have sent an arrow at him, had she had her bow there ready bent. She wrought the water in her hand, and for to wreak the spite, besprinkled all the head and face of the unlucky knight, and thus Forspake the heavy lot that should upon him light. Now make thy vaunt among thy mates. Thou saw'st Diana bear? Tell if thou can, I give thee leave. Tell hurriedly, do not spare. This done, she makes no further threats, but by and by doth spread a pair of lively old hart's horns upon his sprinkled head. She sharps his ears. She makes his neck both slender, long, and lank. She turns his fingers into feet, his arms to spindle shank. She wraps him in a hairy hide beset with speckled spots, and planteth him in fearfulness. And so away he trots, full greatly wondering to himself what made him in that case to be so wide and swift of foot. But when he saw his face and horned temples in the brook, he would have cried alas. But as for then, no kind of speech out of his lips could pass. He sighed and brayed, for that was then the speech that did remain, and down the eyes that were not his bitter tears did rain. No part remained, save his mind, of that he erst had been. What should he do? Turn home again to Cadmus and the queen, or hide himself among the woods? Of this he was afraid, and of t'other ill ashamed. While doubting thus he stayed. His hounds espied him where he was, and Blackfoot first of all, and Stalker, special good of scent, began aloud to call. This latter was a hound of Crete, the other was of Spart. Then all the kennel fell in round, and every for his part did follow freshly in the chase. More swifter than the wind, Spy, Etiel, Scale-cliff, 3 good hounds, come Naval, Arcus kind, Strong Killbuck, Courish Savage, Spring, and Hunter fresh with smell, and Lightfoot, who to lead a chase did bear away the bell. Fierce woodman hurt not long ago in a hunting of a boar, and shepherd wont to follow sheep and neat to field afore. And land fell an eager bitch that had a wolf to sire, another brat called Egredigate, with 2 her puppies by her. And Latin gant as any green wind, a hound in Sicyon bred, Blab, Fleetwood, Patch, whose flecked skin with sundry spots was spread, White, Bowman, Royster, Beauty fair and white as winter's snow, and Tawny, full of dusky hairs that over all did grow. With lusty Ruffler passing all the residue there in strength, and Tempest, best of footmanship in holding out at length, and Cole and Swift and Little Wolf, as white as any other, accompanied with a Cyprian hound that was his native brother. And Snatch, amid whose forehead stood a star as white as snow, the residue being all as black and slick as any crow, and Sluggy Rug, with other 2 that had a sire of Crete, and Dam of Sparta, ton of them called Jolly Boy, a great and large flute hound, to t'other chorl who ever Norring went, and Ringwood with a shrill loud mouth, the which he freely spent, with divers know, whose names to tell it were but loss of time. This fellow's over hill and dale, in hope of prey to climb. Through thick and thin and craggy cliffs, where was no way to go, he flies through grounds, where oftentimes he chased had air, though, even from his own folk is he fain, alas, to flee away. He strained oftentimes to speak, and was about to stay. I am Actaeon! Know your lord and master, sirs, I pray! But use of words and speech did want to utter forth his mind. Their cry did ring through all the wood, redoubled with the wind. First, Slow did pinch him by the haunch, and next came Killdeer in, and Hildred fastened on his shoulder, boat him through the skin. These came forth later than the rest, but cast a coasting thwart a hill, bidded gain ecopa him as he came, and held their master still until that all the rest came in and fastened on him too. No part of him was free from wound. He could none other do but sigh, and in shape of heart with voice as hearts are wont. for voice of man was none now left to help him at the brunt, by braying show his secret grief among the mountains high, and kneeling sadly on his knees with dreary tears and eye, with piteous look instead of hands, his head about to wave, not knowing that it was their lord. The huntsmen cheer their hounds with wonted noise, and for Actaeon looked about the grounds. They hallow who could loudest cry, still calling him by name as though he were not there, and much his absence they do blame, in that he came not to the fall, but slack to see the game. As often as they named him, he sadly shook his head, and fain he would have been away thence in some other stead, but there he was, and well he could have found in heart to see his dog's fell deeds, so that to feel in place he had not be. They hem him in on every side, and in the shape of stag, with greedy teeth and griping paws, their lord in pieces drag. So fierce with cruel Phoebus' wrath, it could not be allayed, till of his fault, by bitter death, the ransom he had paid. Thank you for letting me read to you tonight. Please check the description for where to buy my art, and my channel page for where to send me a one-time donation. My full-length movie audiovisual production of Salome is coming. It's coming. I'll let you know when that's done. Subscribe if you haven't done so, and I will see you tomorrow.